Good morning, everybody. My name is Duduzile Kupega, your grade 11 life sciences teacher. So today we are continuing with the topic of gaseous exchange. The core focus of today's lesson will be on internal and external structure of the lungs, as well as ventilation of the lungs. So this is the structure of the lungs. I'm sure you've seen it quite a number of times before. So when you think of the lungs, this is what you are looking at. But now, as you delve deeper into the lungs, here you'll notice each lung is divided into lobes. We've got two lungs, and each of those lungs are divided into lobes. The left lung is divided into two lobes, whereas the right lung is divided into three lobes. Let's go back. Here's the right lung. There's lobe number 1, lobe number 2, lobe number 3. And the left lung, only two lobes, lobe number 1, lobe number 2. You can see the line here dividing the lobes. So that's how you see it. The right lung, 3 lobes, left lung, 2 lobes. Here's another clearer image here. There are the lobes clearly identified here. And the left lung, only the 2 lobes. Now with the lobes, each of the lobes here have what we call smaller units, which are known as the alveoli. You remember from last week's lesson, we learned that these alveoli are at the ends of the walls of what we call the bronchioles. So the terminal bronchioles would branch. As they branch deeper, they form several ducts that will end in blind sacs. So that's how they end up. And then the walls of those ducts and sacs, they house tiny bulges, which we call the alveoli. These are the tiny bulges. Whenever you see such tiny bulges, you know those are the alveoli. Now, why are they so important? The alveoli, each of the alveolus is surrounded by a network of capillaries. You see here at the bulges, it's surrounded by here, these network of capillaries here, as you can see. This here, the capillaries, this here in the alveolus, that is the site of gaseous exchange. Between what? Between the inhaled air and the blood. Remember, we are focused today on the human gaseous exchange, as you've seen with the lungs. So here with our structure, with gaseous exchange, it occurs at the site whereby there's going to be an exchange of gases between the air that you have inhaled and the blood. So at some point, this air that you've inhaled will need to be moved or transported to the blood. The alveolus walls are composed of what? Epithelial cells. There's a single and flat layer here of the epithelial cells. They are also very, very thin. And that's another important requirement for gaseous exchange structures, right? That they must be thin to allow for efficient and effective gaseous exchange. These here are strengthened by elastic fibers, which allow the alveoli to do what? To stretch and to contract. Remember, they are there by the lungs, and the lungs stretch and contract as the process of gaseous exchange occurs. As you breathe in, your lungs perform. As you breathe out, there's a process of breathing in and breathing out. So there's a stretching and contraction of the lungs. So the epithelial cells here assist with that, because they are strengthened by what we call elastic fibers to allow this alveoli to stretch and contract. Now, here again, now we are going deeper into the structure of the lung. The adult human lung contains about 750 million alveoli. So that's how small they are. Remember, when you're just looking at the lung, it looks very big to you. But as you get deeper and deeper into the bronchioles, it gets smaller and smaller. And eventually, when you get to the alveoli, they are so small that they can fit over 750 million in an adult human being. And because of those 750 million alveoli, therefore, there's a surface area of about 100 to 150 square meters. That's another important requirement for efficient gaseous exchange is that there must be a large surface area. So because of the very many alveoli, you get a larger surface area, making for efficient gaseous exchange. Then moving out of the lungs now. You're done with the structure inside the lungs. These lungs here, they are covered by what? You see, you know the rib cage, right? Here's the rib cage that we see. But the lung, as you get into the lung, it's covered by the serous or pleural membrane. Here, what you can't see, it's a thick structure here. It's a thicker membrane that is covering the lungs. What exactly does it do, this membrane? It's the one that is attaching the rib cage and the diaphragm to the lungs. So it's almost like glue. Yes, it acts like glue. It's attaching the lungs to the rib cage as well as the diaphragm. So there's that glue here that we can't really see when we're looking at this image, but the white here represents that. That's the glue. It's ensuring that the lungs are attached to the rib cage and the diaphragm. What do we call that membrane? It's called the serous membrane or pleural membrane. Important to always note and remember. And then there's also now a narrow space between the lungs and the rib cage wall. So that narrow space there between that membrane, it's filled with serous fluid. This serous fluid will assist with the reduction of friction during breathing. So it acts, you see that liquid, it ensures that it's smooth. Even when the breathing movement occurs, the movement occurs as you breathe in and out, the friction could occur. But because of the fluid that is there, the process of breathing occurs smoothly. It's very smooth and it's not affected negatively because of that fluid. So that fluid is found between what? In the narrow spaces between the lungs and the rib cage wall. So in between there. So after that membrane there's that fluid. Okay, that was it with the structure of the lung. Now we will delve deeper now into what? Focus strictly on external structure of the lung. So please take note of these. You must understand which parts are part of the external structure and which parts are part of the internal structure of the lungs. So the breathing system here of the external structure is made up of what? Lungs. You've got the pleura, which we've just discussed. The lungs, the control breathing, getting rid of the carbon dioxide, and you inhale the oxygen. Pleura is that membrane. We also called it what? The pleura or the serous membrane. It's a double membrane that covers each lung and it's there to protect the lung. What other function is it there for? Besides protecting the lung, it attaches the lung to the rib cage and the diaphragm. So two functions of the pleura. And then the pleural fluid. This fluid here reduces friction during breathing movements. This is what we've just discussed. And then you have entrance points for the bronchi. These here, they transport the air to the lungs, which is linked to the internal transport passages and gaseous exchange surfaces. So there needs to be a transport point, right? An entrance point. Remember, when you breathe in through your nose or your mouth, then the air moves in various other structures up until it gets to the bronchi, and then it branches to the bronchioles and then the alveoli. So that there, the function of those entrance points to the bronchi is to transport the air from the outside environment up until it gets down to the lungs. And then pulmonary arteries and veins. The structure of these ones. The artery walls are smooth muscle fiber. They can contract and they can relax. And the walls of the veins are 3 layers of thinner, less elastic tissues. So between arteries and veins, the difference we've seen now is arteries contract more and more. They are more elastic compared to veins. Veins are less elastic as they have 3 layers. But with artery walls, they are smooth and they can contract and relax quite easily. And then the function of the pulmonary arteries and the veins is to do what? Transport the gases to the heart. Here, pulmonary gives it away. It's involved in the pulmonary system. So they transport gases to the heart, to the lungs, and back to the heart again. And then internal structure of the lung. The internal structure, now we're getting deeper into the lung. The external one, that's one you can label easily when you're given the external structure of the lung. Internal now is where you've got your bronchi, which are the two branches of the trachea. Here is the bronchi, again, just a reminder. There. Okay, no, that is not clearer. These are the bronchi, these two. They branch into each lung. From the trachea over here, it branches into each lung. It's the bronchi. And then the bronchi will branch into other steps further, which are called the bronchioles. So it's many branches upon branches of structures here. So from the bronchi, you will have what? Bronchioles, which are the smaller tubules that branched from the bronchi. And the bronchi branched from what? The trachea. So what is the function of the bronchi? This is the airway in respiratory tract that conducts air into the lungs. So it conducts air from where? From the upper respiratory system, and then it conducts it all the way into the lungs. Bronchioles then will transport these gases to and from the alveoli. And the alveoli is the respiratory surface. That is where you get a diffusion of gases in the alveoli. So these three, you must know these very well. Bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli, they are very important here. And then capillaries, we've discussed briefly. Capillaries, these are networks of blood vessels. They round each alveolus. So each ball of the alveolus there is surrounded by this network of blood vessels, which are called the capillaries. And then that's where they do what? They promote the easy diffusion for the respiratory gases. So at this site, it allows for the diffusion of gases from this air into the blood. That's the site of respiratory gases. And then the pulmonary artery, it enters each lung and it divides into arterioles. And then the capillaries reunite to form the venules. They in turn join to form pulmonary veins that will then leave the lungs. And then here's the structure now. To make it simpler for you to see, we've got this structure over here. You remember when I was just showing you the overall external structure? We've got other muscles involved. So it's not just knowing there's a rib cage and a diaphragm. There are other muscles involved in this entire process. And this figure here, we are looking at those muscles. So each color, we've got different colors here. I've got the purple, pink, green, red, and the lighter shade of green and yellow. All of those are different muscles involved in the breathing process. So breathing is not just an easy process between air and blood. There are also muscles involved. Why do you need muscles here? Because there's a contraction and a relaxation of the lungs. Remember, they contract and they relax to allow you as you breathe in and out. So these muscles always need to be present and active to allow for that process to occur, right? Here, the purple one at the very top, they are called the stenomastoid scalenes over there. And then you've got the inspiratory intercostals here, inspiratory intercostals. You've got expiratory intercostals over there. And then you also have external obliques and then expiratory abdominals. And here, this part, the red here that you see is what we call the diaphragm. We'll move on now to these breathing muscles and understand exactly their structure and their function. These muscles here, they make breathing possible, as I've explained. You need them to assist you as you breathe in, which is called inhalation, and as you breathe out. So the diaphragm, the structure of the diaphragm, here, this one in red. You see the diaphragm? That's one in red. It's a muscular structure below the rib cage, convex or dome-shaped. So it's there, it's convex or dome-shaped, and it's found below the rib cage. What is the function of the diaphragm? Is to separate the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity is what we call your chest cavity. It separates that from the abdominal cavity. So what separates your chest from your abdomen? That is what we call the diaphragm, and it's responsible for inhalation. And then the external intercostal muscles here. These are the external intercostal muscles, which are called the expiratory intercostals. Those ones there. These are the muscle fibers that are between the ribs on the outside of the rib cage, and they help the diaphragm during inhalation. And then you have the abdominal muscles. These are flat muscles of the abdomen. They force air out of the lungs during inhalation. So these ones, they help force the air out of the lungs. The external intercostal muscles, they help with the process of inhalation. But abdominal muscles, they assist during exhalation. And then the exact opposite of the external intercostal muscles is what we call the internal intercostal muscles. These muscle fibers that are between the ribs on the inside of the rib cage. That is why it's called the internal intercostal muscles, because they are found on the inside of the rib cage. The external intercostal muscles are found on the outside, hence the word external, because they are found on the outside of the rib cage. But internal intercostal muscles are found on the inside of the rib cage. And these ones that are found on the inside of the rib cage assist with the process of exhalation. So they help these abdominal muscles during the process of exhaling. That's why they are found inside, because now when you breathe out, that's you exhale, you're removing that air from the inside to the outside. And the external intercostal muscles assist with the process of bringing the air inside the lungs. And then now that you know about the muscles and you know the structure of the lungs, we will now focus on the ventilation of the lungs. How exactly does this air move in and out? How does it flow in and out of the alveoli? That is the topic of ventilation of the lungs. So the flow of air in and out of the alveoli is what we call ventilation. So if you got a test and you're asked, what is ventilation? You can easily answer, it is the flow of air in and out of the alveoli. This process here, it happens by the thorax moving and changing the size. And as it does that, it is doing it with the help of the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. Remember, with intercostal muscles, you've got the external intercostal muscles as well as the internal intercostal muscles and the diaphragm there. So the process of ventilation involves all of those structures. So how? Let's separate it. You've got the process of inhalation and the process of exhalation. That's the process of ventilation. It's a process of inhalation and exhalation. So what's the difference? In an exam question, you'd expect maybe to be asked, draw a table and differentiate between the process of inhalation and exhalation. Then you would draw your table, and then before you even attempt to giving an answer, draw the table as described in the question. And then they asked you to draw a table and note the differences between inhalation and exhalation. So you label it accordingly. Ventilation, which you can label on the one side, inhalation. On the other side, you label exhalation. By doing just that, you're already setting up yourself for good. You're probably like 1 mark ahead now, just by drawing the table and labeling it. That is very important. That's something people overlook most of the time. So you draw the table and you label, very important. And then, because the question strictly asked you to indicate the differences or describe the differences or list the differences between inhalation and exhalation. That's how you do it. You are comparing them. So on this one side, we note inhalation is an active process. Right on the side of exhalation, you are noting the differences. So if in inhalation, it's an active process, it means exhalation will be a passive process. And then you go on again, the diaphragm contracts and flattens. So when you breathe in, your diaphragm will contract, it will narrow, and it flattens. But when you exhale and the air is moving out, your diaphragm relaxes now, and it becomes a dome shaped. During the process of inhalation, the intercostal muscles will again contract, same as the diaphragm. They will contract, meaning they will get narrower. But the intercostal muscles in the process of exhalation, they relax. When you breathe in, your rib cage will be lifted upwards and outwards as you breathe in. The rib cage, the movement of the rib cage there, it breathes in upwards and outwards. That's why when you're looking at to see if maybe, let's say you're looking at a baby and want to see if they're breathing, or just an adult human being, you look for movement, right? You look for movement around there in the rib cage, around the chest area. That's where you want to look for movement for, to see if someone is breathing. And you can clearly see that, okay, there's movement there. There's upward movement and outwards movement. You can see the outwards movement by looking from the outside. That's the rib cage being lifted upwards and then outwards. But when there's a process of exhalation, then the rib cage moves back downwards and inwards. Abdominal muscles, when you inhale, they will relax. So the abdominal muscles, now we are looking at the lower structure there. Remember the diaphragm is in the upper area, and then the abdominal muscles are in the lower parts now of your body. These ones relax when you breathe in, but when you breathe out, they contract. And then the thoracic cavity, which is the chest area, it enlarges when you breathe in. The volume of that cavity will increase. But the volume of the cavity when you breathe out will decrease. And then pressure in this thoracic cavity will drop. Why is the pressure dropping? When you increase volume, you decrease pressure. So that's what happens. When volume is increased, pressure is decreased. And the opposite happens. When volume decreases, then pressure increases. So that's why when the thoracic cavity enlarges, even the pressure in that cavity will drop. But when the volume in the thoracic cavity decreases, then the pressure will increase. So they are inverse to each other. Pressure and volume, they are indirectly proportional. So when one increases, the other one will decrease. When one decreases, the other one increases. Think of it that way. Always remember it that way. They are inversely proportional. Volume and pressure. When volume increases, pressure will decrease. Here, when volume decreases as you breathe out, then pressure will increase. In where? In the thoracic cavity. And then oxygen-rich air is drawn into the lungs. That's why you are inhaling. You are taking in this oxygen-rich air. So it's drawn into, inhaled into the lungs. And when you exhale, the carbon dioxide-rich air is forced out of the lungs. It's exiting, hence the E there, exhale. It's exiting. It explains the process of exiting. There's air that is moving outside, it's exiting. But which air is that? When you inhale, you are the more air that's taken into the lungs is the oxygen-rich air. But the air that is taken out of the lungs, that is forced out of the lungs, is the what? Carbon dioxide. And then this is a structure again to show you how these muscles and all these other structures function together. Here you see the rib cage moving up and outwards, and the diaphragm is contracting and moving downwards. That's the process there. You are breathing in here. And then when you breathe out, the rib cage moves back down. You can see the structure. Look at the structure here. When you breathe out, it's further down. You can see it's curved now. It's further down now. The rib cage has moved down and inside. And then now the diaphragm has relaxed now. It's more relaxed and it moves up. You can see the difference here. The diaphragm is more up. But here, when you're breathing in, the diaphragm is down as it has contracted. And then the pressure inside the lungs will decrease as the air rushes in, because why? The volume has increased. Volume has increased, therefore pressure decreases and air is rushing in. But pressure in the lungs will then increase when air is moved out, because the volume has decreased now. The volume of it's decreasing. Here, this one, the white here, the white, that's almost like a shadow. That's the pleural membrane that you see there covering the lungs. And then here is your diaphragm over there. So this here, A is the process of inhalation, and on the right-hand side, B is the process of exhalation. So even if you are shown this diagram and you are comparing against each other, you can clearly see here, you're looking at the rib cage, you're looking at the diaphragm, the differences in the rib cage and the diaphragm, as well as looking at the pressure. Here, when the pressure in the lungs decreases, you see here, it's because the volume has increased. You can even see by the structure of the lung, the volume has increased. The lungs here on this side, when you inhale, looks much bigger than the lung on this side when you exhale, because pressure has, this side it has decreased, volume has increased. But this side, pressure in the lungs has increased and volume has decreased. And then gaseous exchange in the alveoli. Gaseous exchange in the alveoli. When you breathe in, oxygen-rich air will move through your nose or mouth into the nasal cavity, through the pharynx, larynx, and trachea. We did this last week when we focused on the upper respiratory system. We focused on that upper system where the air moves into your nose or your mouth, is cleaned, moistened, and then it then moves into the cavities, the intranasal cavity, then through the pharynx, larynx, and trachea. The air then that is now moved to the trachea, from the trachea, it then will flow through the trachea, where to? Into the bronchi, and then the bronchi will form more branches. And as they form into branches, what are those branches called? The bronchioles, which will then, the bronchioles are the ones that will carry this air into the alveoli. So if we were to look at where it begins, let me highlight with a pen. So it's through your nose or mouth. It moves through to your nasal cavity. From the nasal cavity, that's where it's cleaned, right? Your air is cleaned. The dust particles are trapped. It is moistened. It is moistened and it is properly cleaned now. And it is warmed up, right? The air is warmed. And then it will move through to your pharynx. From the pharynx, the air will move through to the larynx. From the larynx, it moves to the trachea. So that's the process. It moves to the trachea. From the trachea, it goes to the bronchi. The bronchi are the ones I showed you. They branch into the lungs. Those are the structures that branch into the lungs. These are the bronchi. So this here would represent a trachea. This is the bronchi, the two branches moving into the left lung and the right lung. And the bronchi forms more branches, which are called the bronchioles. The bronchioles then will also carry the air to what we call the alveoli. So that's just the structure to remember quickly. That's how it moves. Just remember those structures that are involved in the movement of air up until the alveoli. Now, when it gets to alveoli, the alveolar walls, they are surrounded by a close net of blood capillaries. We've covered that. They are surrounded by capillaries. Capillaries that's where diffusion of the gases takes place. From where? From this structure into the blood. So the oxygen in the alveoli will diffuse. Remember, diffusion is a process whereby there'll be a movement from a high concentration to a low concentration. So this here, the oxygen will move from the alveoli, which is the site whereby there's high concentration of air, and it will move through the alveoli walls into the blood capillaries. At this instance, the blood capillaries have a low concentration of oxygen. So diffusion is the movement of that gas from a high concentration to a region of low concentration. Alveoli is filled with lots of oxygen-rich air. That's why it will move through these walls into the blood capillaries, which at this moment have low oxygen concentration. And then from there, this oxygenated blood will then leave the lungs, because this is happening, the alveoli are in the lungs, right? This oxygenated blood is now in the blood, right? It moved from the alveoli to the blood. It will now leave the blood. It will leave the lungs. This blood here will leave the lungs through the pulmonary veins. So it's leaving this blood through the veins. Remember those capillaries, they're living through the veins, the pulmonary veins, and it's going to the heart. So it's moving from the alveoli to the blood there. And then from there, the pulmonary veins transport this oxygenated blood to the heart. What happens when it gets to the heart? The heart is then pumping this oxygenated blood around the body. So this oxygenated blood will move to all the other cells in the body and other organs that require oxygenated blood. So that's the process of inhalation first. You see the process of inhaling air. It moves in there up until it gets to the heart, where it's pumped to all other parts of your body. But when you breathe out now, when you breathe out, the carbon dioxide that is in the blood capillaries. So the high concentration of carbon dioxide is found in the blood capillaries at this instance. It will diffuse again, diffusion from a high concentration to a low concentration. It will diffuse from that high concentration through the alveoli walls into the alveoli. So it's a reverse of what happened when oxygen was being transported, right? When oxygen was being transported, it moved from the alveoli through the capillaries into the blood. But now, when you breathe out, this carbon dioxide is moving from the blood capillaries, diffusing through the alveoli walls into the alveoli. Why? Because the alveoli at this instance have a low concentration of carbon dioxide. Okay, carbon dioxide. And then it will then follow the reverse path out of the body. The reverse path being what? When it comes from the alveoli, the carbon dioxide rich air now is in the alveoli. So it will move back to what? The bronchioles, and then back to the bronchi, and then through the trachea, and then again moving out of that whole system that we've explained, which is the larynx, pharynx, and then you breathe out through your mouth or the nasal cavity. So that's the reverse system. If you just understand one way of the system, it's easy to also understand the reverse of that system. So pay key attention to those structures that we have mentioned. So yeah, this you are most likely to also get such a question in an exam. What is this structure for? This is the structure of the alveoli, right? You see the structure of the alveoli here. You've got the capillaries there that are surrounding that. So you've got here these capillaries, as you can see, and then this is the artery. This is the vein. Remember, the pulmonary vein is the one that will be transporting oxygen-rich air to the heart, and then the heart will pump that oxygen-rich blood now. It will pump that oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the cells and organs in the body. But the artery will now be carrying what we call that one that has the deoxygenated one, the one with that is carbon dioxide rich. Yeah? The oxygen enters the red blood cells. Remember there, that movement? The epithelium cells, the epithelials of the alveoli, those are the epithelial there, as you can see. And then carbon dioxide escapes into the alveolus. This is the reverse now. When you breathe out, carbon dioxide will be moving from the capillaries, the blood capillaries, into what? The alveolus. Then it's going to be transported back out of your body. So that is it. That is the structure of the gaseous exchange for this week. So remember the structure I showed you last week. I think when you're looking at it now, it makes more sense. It's much clearer as opposed to last time when we saw it, right? You've got your nasal cavity and oral cavity. That is the site where you get your air from the environment. So there's the exchange between the body and the external environment occurs here with the nasal area and your oral cavity. That's where it occurs. Then there's a movement of the air through the larynx, the pharynx, as well as the trachea. There's the trachea. And then it branches into the bronchi. Now you can clearly see there's the bronchi. And then the bronchi branches into what? The bronchus, which are then called in plural the bronchioles. These are the smaller branches, bronchioles. And at the very tips of the bronchioles, that's where you find what? The alveoli. And that is the site of gaseous exchange or diffusion of gases between the structure of called the alveoli into the blood. And which is what? Oxygen-rich air moving into the blood. And also carbon dioxide-rich air from the blood to what? To the alveoli and back up again in the very same system. So this structure makes more sense now, right? So yeah, that is it from me today regarding the lesson. And then with today's motivation, I don't even know where to begin. Today, I do not have motivation for you because I myself need motivation today. I think I'm feeling very, very low, but I think I'll take the lesson from there. That it's okay to have days where you don't feel on top of the world. It's okay to have days where you feel sad. It's okay to have days where you feel like you want more, but you don't really have that more that you want and you're striving for. Days where you feel like your best is not good enough. Have you ever studied so hard for a test and you still fail it? Yeah, that feeling. So it's okay. It's okay to have days like that. I think the lesson here is, for some reason, as human beings, we speak more about our joy than we speak about our pain. We speak more about our strengths than we speak more about our weaknesses. Forgetting that both of them, all of them make up the human experience. They all make you, you know, the good and the bad, the happy and the sad, they all just make you, you. Your strengths and your weaknesses, they define you. And it's okay to own up to all of them. It's okay to talk about the sad days as much as we talk about the happy days. So that's okay. If you're feeling sad, if you're feeling like your best is not good enough, if you feel like you're trying so hard, but it's just not working out, it's life. Unfortunately, some days are like that. So there's nothing I can say about that. But talk about it if you can, or read, or write, just write in a journal, read a book, listen to a song that will help you express yourself. Any way that you can do and cope with whatever you're going through. But what's important is that you do not let those bad days define you. You do not let that little failure define you as a human being. You will cry today, get up tomorrow and try again. You failed the test today, cry as much as you need to, And then after you're done crying, go back to studying and promise yourself to do better. And eventually something was gonna give, something will eventually give, and you will find that you will really do better. Things change, you know, nothing's ever the same. So one day it's night time, the next it's morning, you know, one time it's spring, the next it's winter. And you don't really enjoy winter as much as you enjoy summer, but they are all there for a reason. All seasons of a year are there for a reason, all 4 seasons. So enjoy winter, bask in it, take the lessons that you need to learn from winter, so that even when summer comes, you get to enjoy it fully because you've gone through the experience of winter and you are now more able to appreciate summer even more. So if you're feeling down or sad, remember that it's okay. That's what I'm saying to you today. It's okay to feel like that. But after feeling the emotions, allow yourself to feel them and then bounce back. Ne? Try harder, do better next time. Thank you, everybody. I will see you next week. For more inquiries, if you maybe have more questions about the lesson, feel free to send me an email here. I will respond. Anything life sciences related, I will gladly assist. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.